Dolores Keane's passing was peaceful, but her final journey tells a deeper story. From a quiet home in Galway to a farewell watched by thousands, something about this goodbye feels different. She was a voice that lived in songs, in memories, in places people never forgot. But when that voice fell silent, it didn't happen the way anyone expected. Dolores Keane passed away peacefully in her sleep at her home in Caherlistrain, County Galway. No hospital, no final public appearance, just a quiet night that turned into a permanent silence. She was 72, and for someone whose life was filled with music, the stillness of her passing felt almost unreal. Because for decades, her voice had been anything but quiet. News of her death spread quickly, but what followed next was something deeper than headlines. It wasn't just shock, it was a kind of silence that people didn't know how to explain. In Galway, a book of condolence was opened at County Hall. And people began to arrive not just to sign their names, but to say goodbye in their own way. Some stood quietly thinking, remembering, struggling to find the right words. Others wrote long messages, as if they were speaking directly to her one last time. And even those who couldn't be there found a way to connect. An online book of condolence filled with messages from across the world, from people who had never met her, yet felt they knew her. Because Dolores Keane was never just a singer. She was a presence, a feeling, something that lived quietly in everyday life. Her music had been heard in kitchens, in pubs, in small gatherings and large halls. It was part of ordinary moments, and that's what made her loss feel so personal. But to understand why her farewell felt so heavy, you have to go back long before the final goodbye. Back to a small home in Caherlistrain, where music wasn't taught, it was lived. Dolores had been singing since the age of 2, not because she had to, but because it was simply part of who she was. She grew up surrounded by voices, by stories, by melodies that filled the air every day. Her aunts Rita and Sarah Keane were already known for their singing, and the house was never quiet. Musicians would come and go, sometimes staying for days, sometimes for a full week. And in those moments, music wasn't performance, it was life itself. Dolores once said she never really learned the songs. She just heard them so often that they became part of her memory, part of her voice. By the time she was a child, she could sing alongside her family without hesitation. Not because she practiced, but because she belonged there. And that natural connection, that effortless way of singing, stayed with her for the rest of her life. It became the thing that made her voice so distinctive, so deeply recognizable. As the years passed, that voice began to travel beyond her home. She performed with her family and then with the group Dannan, bringing Irish traditional music to wider audiences. It wasn't loud fame or sudden success. It was steady growing, built on something real. Her music carried emotion in a way that felt honest. Not forced, not exaggerated, just real feeling in every note. And that's why people connected with her. Because when she sang, it didn't feel like a performance, it felt like truth. Her career stretched over 5 decades, touching audiences not just in Ireland but around the world. And songs like Caledonia became more than music, they became memories for those who listened. She was described as having a voice that could reach deep into your soul. A voice that could carry both joy and sorrow at the same time. But even with all that recognition, something about her remained unchanged. She stayed connected to where she came from, to the simplicity of music, to the feeling behind it. And maybe that's why, when news of her passing came, it didn't feel distant. It felt close, like something personal had been lost. But what happened next is what truly defined her final journey. As the day of her wake arrived, people began to gather at Kerry's funeral home. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was quiet, almost heavy. There were no grand moments, no dramatic scenes. Just people standing, remembering, trying to process what had happened. Some looked at her as if trying to hold onto a final image. Others stood back, unable to come closer, overwhelmed by the moment. Time seemed slower inside that space. Conversations were softer, movements more careful, as if everyone understood the weight of the moment. And yet, even in that silence, there was something else. A sense that this wasn't just an ending, but part of something larger. Then came the day of the funeral. Friday afternoon at St. Patrick and St. Cuana Church in Kilcuna. The family arrived early, before the service began. And people were already waiting, quietly, respectfully, giving them space. There was no rush, no noise, just a steady presence of those who had come to say goodbye. Some had known her personally, others only through her music. But in that moment, the difference didn't matter. Because everyone there shared the same reason for being present. Inside the church, the atmosphere remained calm, almost still. It wasn't filled with loud grief, but with something deeper, something quieter. And outside, beyond the walls of the church, something else was happening. The service was being live-streamed, reaching people far beyond Galway. From different countries, different time zones, people were watching. Saying goodbye from a distance, yet feeling part of the same moment. A traditional farewell carried into the modern world. A private loss becoming something shared globally. And that contrast made the moment even more powerful. Because even in her final goodbye, her voice was still bringing people together. Then came the final part of the journey. The burial at Dannan Cemetery. No stage, no spotlight, just earth, silence, and the people closest to her. The kind of ending that reflects a simple truth, no matter who you are. After a lifetime of music, the final moment had no sound. No applause, no final note, just stillness. For her family, this was not the loss of a legend. It was the loss of someone they loved, someone who had been at the center of their lives. She was a mother to her son Joseph and daughter Tara. A grandmother to Megan and Sion. A sister to those who had shared her life from the very beginning. And in that space, those roles mattered more than anything else. Because beyond the public image, beyond the music, there was a person. Someone who had lived, loved, and left behind memories that couldn't be replaced. And maybe that's what made her farewell feel so different. Not the scale, not the attention, but the feeling behind it. A quiet passing, followed by a farewell that brought people together in silence. A life filled with sound ending without it. But even in that silence, something remained. Something that didn't disappear with her passing. Her voice. It still exists in recordings, in memories, in the moments people return to again and again. It lives in the songs that continue to be played, long after she is gone. And that's the part of her story that doesn't end. Because music, when it's real, doesn't fade the way people do. It stays, it lingers, it finds new listeners, new meaning. And in that way, her voice continues, even in her absence. So when people say goodbye, it isn't just about loss. It's about remembering what remains. And for Dolores Keane, what remains is something that can still be heard. Something that still reaches people, in the same quiet way it always did. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home. Those words meant something long before her passing. But now they carry a different kind of weight. Because maybe in the end, they became her final message. Not spoken, not announced, but felt by those who listened. And as her journey came to a close, the silence she left behind was not empty. It was filled with everything she had given to the world.